Hey there, and welcome to the Jeffrey Van Dyke Show, a podcast for paradigm changers. Each week I speak with another influential leader who's changing the conversation for their audience, their industry, and this world. I am so glad you're here. Welcome to the show. Hello, everybody. Welcome. It is so good to have you here, and so good to have my dear friend, Lori Leyden, with us. Let me just share a little bit about her from a bio perspective, then I'll share a little bit about her from a personal perspective, and then I know you'll experience her in a very rich way in this conversation. So Lori Leyden, PhD, MBA, is an internationally renowned, known trauma healing professional, a transformational leader, a spiritual mentor. She's brought comfort, peace, hope to thousands of people around the world, from genocide survivors in Rwanda to Australian Aboriginal and refugee communities to post-school shooting communities in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, and Parkland, Florida. Dr. Leyden is the founder of the nonprofit Create Global Healing and established Project Light Rwanda, the world's first international youth healing, heart-centered leadership and entrepreneur program. Her award-winning documentary, When I Was Young, I Said I Would Be Happy, chronicles the transformation of 12 Rwandan orphan genocide survivors and how they paid it forward to hundreds of other young people. She's a member of the Global Evolutionary Leaders Council, the Association of Transformational Leaders, and Visioneers.org. Lori, my dear, thank you for being here.
Oh, Jeffrey, you know I love to play with you and
Yes.
to inspire with you.
Yeah. So let me just share a little bit about my love affair with Lori, and then we'll dive in from there. Lori and I are both part of the Association of Transformational Leaders. I think that's where we met.
Yeah.
And just from the get-go, you know, there are certain people where you just click, your soul recognizes one another, you go like, we're part of the same team, even if it's unspoken about what that team is. So we've just had a delightful time over the years, being in each other's space, supporting one another, lifting one another up. And when I thought about season 2 of this show and who I'd really want to feature in terms of folks that are doing, I would normally say paradigm-changing work. The word that's coming to mind for you is revolutionary work. People that I think are deeply courageous and deeply committed. And Lori is one of the first people that came to mind. So thank you for being here, my dear.
Oh, and thank you, Jeffrey. I remember the first time we met, I actually went up to you and said, I need to know you. Can we chat? It was all about your aura and your presence. So I'm thrilled to be here today.
Yeah. So there's a lot of places I want to cover, but for this conversation, I actually want to start with the work itself. Mm-hmm. And there's kind of two aspects of your work, the trauma healing work and the leadership work. Start by telling us a bit about the trauma healing work, the work in Rwanda, the work after communities have experienced shootings in schools. What is that work? How did you get into it? How does it work?
Look, this all began because I had a passion for healing my own childhood traumas. And I explored every healing modality, as I like to say, human and extraterrestrial and any other thing there was. Because I felt like traditional forms of healing were too, were too steeped in suffer and struggle and what is broken. And so I've been on a lifelong journey to call in what are the most elegant and graceful ways for us to heal our traumas. And I believe that we all have two traumas that we're born with. One is the or two life purposes, I should say. Our first trauma is the wound of separation from the divine as we take physical form. And the second then is during the journey of trauma healing, We can find the seeds of our destiny through that healing. And then the job is to step into our unique expression of divinity so that together we can create global healing. Now, to say that it's quite astounding that that's where I find myself at this stage in my life. But it was all about saying yes to my heart. And because of the trauma I'd experienced, I did not have the capacity to follow my heart. I was trying to do what other people thought I should do. So it took a near-death experience in 2003 where literally a big booming voice in my head as I was taking my last breath said, everything in life is a choice, including taking the next breath. That I am still in the research of that's true. I then realized that so much of it was about receiving. My heart did not feel safe to receive because of the trauma I had experienced. And that's another conversation. But I made a vow to follow my heart after that, wherever it led me. And that led me from Rhode Island to California to Rwanda and other continents. I also asked at the same time, what is a healing modality that I could bring that would help people heal gracefully and easily and elegantly? And I received this formula called the Grace Process in a series of meditations. And I also had learned, I knew for decades about emotional freedom techniques / tapping. I've combined those two modalities and brought those to these traumatized communities. And I have seen, and I continue to see the miracles that are possible out of tragedy when we have a spiritual base, a strong, and also a very strong ability to regulate our physiology. And I don't want to get too off track, but the bottom line is I have discovered that we are physiologically tuned to connect to our divinity, and trauma dysregulates our physiology, which then doesn't allow us to connect with our divinity. So my work is all about teaching people how to regulate their heart-brain-body connection so that the heart is communicating with the brain. And in those places, we have access to our highest human genius, creative problem solving, inner wisdom, transcendency, connectedness, that sense of peace and safety that allows and we are all heart-wired for the divine. And my work is about teaching people that they are unique expressions of the divine and how to physiologically tune into their human gifts, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. There's a lot there. I've never thought of how we are physiologically set up to be connected to the divine. But of course that makes sense if we are connections and aspects of the divine, right? And that trauma and dysregulation is the thing that prevents it or shuts it down or obscures it. I'm also sitting here going, I know you've worked with, the kids in Sandy Hook, the kids in Parkland, Florida, kids in Connecticut, right? I know you've worked in Rwanda and in other communities. And on one hand, I'm like, this is really deep spiritual principle and deep spiritual work that you're doing in communities that might not have ever seen or been exposed to this, right? How does that work? I mean, on the other side, I go, nothing like collective trauma to open up a doorway for something new.
There's many ways that I could answer that, but I think the most important for people who are really wanting to go deep, I call it go deep or go home, and have maximum impact and influence. When I received the call to Rwanda, and I never go anywhere that I'm not invited in, because I believe that it's a collaboration and a partnership in which I have my skills, but the community and the people in the community are the experts in what they need. So when I received the call to Rwanda, I spent 3 months doing very deep meditative work in which my purpose was to transcend my ego and to imagine, could I sit in front of a woman who had experienced the Rwandan genocide, whose family was murdered in front of her, who was now left with AIDS because of the torture of rape. Could I sit with orphan head of households who were 6 to 8 years old at the time of the genocide and took care of 2 to 6 other kids? Could I sit with a genocidaire, a person who had murdered 100 people? And that was the work I did. That was the most beneficial because I had my skills, I've got my, my books, I've got my degrees, but it was all about, could I be fully present in my heart to whatever was being presented to me in the moment. And Rwanda, that year I actually thought I was going to meet my spiritual romantic partner, but instead I got a country. And when I
love it.
And when I think about that, what did I need to have this now, how many years later, 18 years later, relationship with Rwanda and my beautiful family there was deep intimacy and courage and commitment and continuing to clear the field and be in my heart. And I can tell you, depending on which way you want this to go, I can tell you about a significant experience in Rwanda that showed me that the work that I had done on myself to heal myself first, a number one priority for any influencer and any visionary, whatever your vision or purpose is, not to compare it to anyone else. Like parents have the most amazing destiny in our world, and some of us have bigger, seemingly bigger
external expressions.
Thank you.
Yeah. One of the things my guidance always tells me is you cannot change that which you cannot love. And so when you're talking about this work you were doing on yourself, it's like, can I love this person? Can I see them? Can I really see them? Yes. Because if I can't, all I'm going to do is try to apply something onto them, right? It's not going to be inspired. It's not going to be organic. It's not actually going to be needed. It might make you feel better, right, as the person coming in to do the work. One of the things I see for all the clients I work with, and the folks I work with all have kind of a change the world mission. There's this funny thing that until we do the work to identify the wound that's inspired the work and bless the wound, right? Thank you, wound, for training me, teaching me, preparing me. Until we do that, we use the next mission as the thing to prove whatever we're trying to prove because of our wounding, right? So if the wounding's I'm a loser and the quest of the ego is I'm a winner, well, what greater way to win than to win with your grand life mission, right? So it becomes an agent not of purpose, but an agent of the wound unconsciously. And so what I hear you saying is I really focus on getting to the place inside of myself and the work you do with the leaders you work with, getting them into the place where they can come from that place of love, that place of true service, and co-create the healing that wants to happen.
Yes. And I love the way you're expressing this. Whenever we have these conversations, it really expands my knowing of what is unfolding. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Quick question. How do you get invited? Like, phone ring. Hey, come to Rwanda. Hey, we just had a huge shooting in Parkland. Come to Florida. Like, how do the invitations happen?
Yeah, divine guidance. Gosh, the first one was someone in Rwanda who had read my first book, who asked me if the book could be translated into the language of Rwanda, which is Kinyarwanda. And I had always had a deep connection with genocide and the notion that this cannot happen again, even though it's happened again and again. And that's a whole nother story about how I got connected to genocide. But when this person sent me this email, I said, of course it can be translated. And what else can I do? And they said, well, please come here and teach your trauma healing skills to our widow and orphan genocide survivors. And I went, yes! And then I went, how the is that going to happen? I had just been through a divorce. I had moved from one place in the country to the next. I was just really getting on my feet again. And interestingly enough, I thought, well, I don't have the money to go spend a month in Rwanda because you've got to pay for food for people, for transportation. I mean, there's a lot of expenses that people don't understand, and the translators and everything else. And that, someone said, well, why don't you ask people for money? Thank you. Because, that's the last thing. Tell me anything. That would be it was such shame. I was supposed to have that money at that point in my life, at that age. And this is really such an important step for me because I did all this work to clear my shame of having to ask for money until I realized that I was giving people an opportunity to partner with me and go with me even though they couldn't. That people had this place in their heart where they wanted to support healing for people who had been through the worst of human tragedies. And after a lot of work, literally 100 days, it rained miracles. When I put out my first request for money, it rained miracles. I had third graders sending me dollars. I had people I don't even know who anonymously sent money. And I realized that the money was this beautiful exchange of miracles, this beautiful love exchange. And when I finally got to Rwanda and I had these hundreds of people, who had donated, I don't care whether it was $1 or $2,000, I felt connected, I felt supported, even though I was by myself. But I was leaning into this love that helped me ride into the experience.
I love that story. Reminds me of Amanda Palmer, singer, wrote a book, The Art of Asking. And it's all about hey, we're a community and we get to support one another. From a spiritual principle, one of the things my guidance always says is all inspired ideas have a life force to them. All inspired ideas have a life force to them. There's an intelligence to it. And that everything required for the full expression of that inspired idea is connected to it, to the life force of it, not to me, right? So I really started shifting my perception of my work and when I work with others from I'm the hub and all the resources are the spokes to the inspired idea is the hub. I'm one of the resources of the inspired idea, along with all the other resources for the full expression of that inspired idea to be made manifest in this world, right? So you just demonstrated this. You get the call. What more can I do? Come. Sure. Oh, crap. Right? the other thing is that our life's mission is always in service to us first.
Yes.
Right? It always calls forth a larger expression of who we are than we could ever imagine we could be. And so long as we keep saying yes, as uncomfortable as it may be, we get stretched and open and stretched and open and stretched and open, and then we become this more expansive, available leader in the world. Mm-hmm. So here you are, you've written the book, you've gotten your PhD, you've done the things, and then, hey, ask for money. Right? And all the stuff. But here's the deal. Here's the principle that I want to highlight for everybody listening. You said yes. You were willing, right? You did the courageous act, I think, of encountering the obstacles, the crunchy bits internally, and said, you know what? That thing is more important than my discomfort.
Yes. Yes.
You know, and so all these other resources that are attached to this work of Rwanda, the person calling you up, another resource attached to the life force of this work in Rwanda. All the people in that community attached to the life force of this work in Rwanda, right? Mm-hmm. So it's much bigger than we ever perceive, and it's not, quote unquote, ours.
Well, one of the things that I work with people and that I believe deeply is that everything we choose to heal in ourselves sets up a resonance field for that healing to unfold in the world. So that our greatest service work in the world truly is being in service to our own healing first. And it is from that place that we can truly give. And, you know, I've gone into all of these communities, and oftentimes there is a great pull for people to want to volunteer and descend on these communities in reference to what you spoke about earlier, to heal their own wound. And then we end up, unfortunately, even though they're so good intentioned, who manages the volunteers? Who manages the trauma that is being triggered for the volunteers, so that in fact that becomes an added burden and this is why I train and mentor people who are willing to heal their own deepest wounds first and then be of service, or at least certainly be in active service to their own healing while they are giving back. But giving back has to start with loving myself enough to put my own healing first. And as we've talked about, many of the influencers I work with, there is remnants of trauma that need to be healed in order to truly step into their destiny and their impact, and to attract those souls who have come here to work with us and work in these communities. There's no doubt in my mind when I go to Rwanda and Aboriginal communities in Australia and Parkland and Sandy Hook, I meet my soul family. It is amazing by saying yes, but I say yes with, I hope, a sense of responsibility. Yes, with the knowing that the first thing I do is go inside and figure out, is this mine to do? And what is it that I need to do to make sure that I can meet this opportunity? And as far as, it always amazes me how people get connected with me. I mean, people do know of what I do in the world. I'm always, every day when some amazing opportunity presents itself, I know that it's about connecting hearts around the world, and I don't have to worry. This is part of my surrender. Not that I don't worry once in a while, but the surrender is the hearts are connected out there, and it will flow if I allow it to. Does that make any sense?
I think it does. Say a bit more about it, and then I have another specific question around trauma communities.
Well, I mean, I get a lot of invitations, but I have to assess: is this community ready for this? Who are the support people on the ground? There are a lot of just technical details about making connections. How can I enter this community safe, meaning provide safety for people? So, for example, in Sandy Hook, we set up the United States' first trauma healing community-based EFT tapping program. So I went in quietly. I made connections with lots of the influencers in the town. I did not tell them I knew the answer. I simply shared what my experience was and what skills I brought to the table. But we had to connect with the legal community, the education community, the mental health community, the social services community, every agency that was involved with helping this town heal. And so we just went in and found those partnerships. We found alliances. We built safety in simply giving people an experience of what we were about. And from that, we gained a great deal of trust and depth in our relationships. From there, that's where all the referrals came from. People just knew that this was a safe place to go.
Yeah. What do you see happens in individuals, but also at a collective level in a community, when a community goes through great trauma and then goes through trauma healing? Like, how are they different? Like, how is a person who hasn't experienced the trauma yet, right, the same person who lives in this community, different, not just after the trauma, but different after trauma healing? So I didn't have the trauma, I had the trauma, I had trauma healing, and now, like, who's that person? And what is that community?
How much time do we have? I guess the brief thing is, let's just say this. Just like COVID, whatever unrealized, unhealed trauma you had, COVID blew it all up, right? What did COVID do? Separation, aloneness. I mean, it just triggered everyone's trauma that hasn't been healed. Healing communities takes a long time. And so we look for, how can we help the most resilient, how can we create a strong foundation of people who have healed from the trauma and are now resilient to go into their community. So I always train, like I train Newtowners to help other Newtowners. I help Rwandans train other Rwandans. It does no good to have. What often happens in these communities is people rush in for the first month or 2 months or 3 months, and then everybody leaves. It's like a death. Then there's another part of the grieving. And so there's two things. There's post-traumatic stress disorder, and there's complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So if someone had experienced the death of a loved one, and look, everyone in these communities is traumatized, even if they're not related, because they're so horrific. But what happens is, if we don't get trauma healing techniques to them early enough to regulate their physiology so they feel safe inside their bodies, they will continue to rack up more and more trauma. So if you can imagine a community like Sandy Hook, a father loses a son and then develops cancer, or someone commits suicide in the family, or some other tragedy happens. So now we've got this domino effect where in the brain, literally in the brain, these events are all connected, and they need to be physiologically healed, so that with the grace process and EFT, people feel safe enough in the presence of the memories without getting hijacked with the cortisol and steroids and adrenaline that stress hormones and trauma hormones bring in. So our job first is to help them feel safe in their brains and their bodies and their hearts. And from that place, so the resilient trauma survivor, and there are many, but the ones that really touch my heart are, I adopted 12 Rwandan orphan genocide survivors. They're now in their 30s. They have nothing. They had nothing. I can't even go into the horror of their stories. But we put them through this Project Light 1-month training program with EFT and the grace process. They are now, these young people who at the time were in their early 20s, have now gone into their communities and helped heal hundreds and hundreds of people because they're so resilient. They believe that God saved them for a reason. And even though they continue to face horrors of turmoil in their country, no jobs, no visible means of support, they have this spiritual and physiological foundation that allows them every day to go out and look for the divine in everything they're experiencing. That, to me, is the profound. And if they can do it, who the heck are we not to?
Yeah. The reason I ask the question is, I always look at the gift of the wound. And every wound that I've run into so far has a gift.
Yes.
Oftentimes those gifts are unrealized or unseen, but once we realize and see them, they're profound in how we can support and serve others. And so I was thinking about what's the gift that trauma surviving communities are here to bring to the world? Mm-hmm. What are they here to teach us?
And so, obviously, that's a deep question, and to parse out here that yes, I see the gift of tragedy. I see the miracles that come out of these things, and I want to be careful. We have this law of attraction work out there right now that sometimes is indelicately communicated or perhaps unsubstantially communicated. And so it's really a choice. What do I want more than my grief and trauma? That's the question. Because oftentimes what happens can become a story that holds us back. What I see in these communities is that the people who made it their first priority to heal themselves and heal their families can come together and make positive solutions for the rest of the community. There is a place of presence on an individual level where people can feel safe with the other people who have experienced trauma, their similar trauma that only those people know. And if they can sit with someone who's healed that they trust because they know they went through the same trauma, there's so much that can unfold. When you think about Rwanda, for example, how could it be that one of the worst human tragedies could actually be a beacon of hope for the rest of the world? Because when it comes to something like Rwanda, and there's a lot of political issues here, however, they only had one option to heal, and that was forgiveness and reconciliation. There was no way to go, they just had to jump to that. Now, it's an uneasy piece, and it's 20 years after, it's more than that, but it takes a while. But literally, the people I've met and worked with in Rwanda have chosen peace in their hearts and peace in their country over the trauma of what happened. And the people I work with have an opportunity to even understand that what their neighbor did in killing their family, they get to understand what drove that person to do that, what kind of fear, what kind of manipulation and control, and again, that's a whole another
Yeah.
workshop.
Yeah.
But if those people can do it and literally heal the deepest wound and go back into community to live next door to the people who stole their homes and murdered their families, it's incredible.
You know what strikes me? This is striking me very deeply. We talk so much right now about political polarization, right? Especially in America, that we, we can't talk to one another. We don't speak to one another. All we do is try to yell over top of one another, and that it's getting worse. And then we add, social media and the proliferation of misinformation to the mix. And, and where is that bringing us? And what's that going to do to democracy? And again, this question of like, what do these communities have to teach us? And I think you just named it, right? Like, hell, if that can happen in Rwanda, what can happen here? Now, you also said they didn't have another option, right? Like, they had to jump. I don't know what it will take for the rest of this world, but I do feel like that there is a great gift for these communities to share with us. Totally. And that may be too much to ask, but at least like, you give me hope in saying, and sharing that story about what anyone in the world can do in terms of peace and reconciliation, right? That if that can happen in Rwanda, what can happen here? What can happen in your neighborhood? What can happen in your community?
And most important, to emphasize that the peace that you gain in your heart by doing your own work and putting yourself first in terms of healing and peace is the very presence is the gift. And it's really about creating an army of what I call peace builders who are willing to be fully present in their hearts, transcending their egos with no agenda, to allow what really wants to emerge in the space of healing.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. You've referenced the grace process a few different times. Can you, and by the way, for folks listening, Lori will give you a link to go download this and go through the 5 stages on your own. But could you just briefly bring us through the 5 stages? And then I want to ask you a few more, I want to go in a few other directions before we close today.
Great. So there's 2 things really. 5 stages of embodied grace, which to me is something that, I downloaded, I channeled, I guess, for people to be able to track their spiritual journey. Because, when we start on this journey, we start on it because generally from a place of pain, and we want to figure out how we're going to heal that. So there are 5 stages of embodied grace, I believe. And the first stage is separation. That is that place where we feel separate and alone from the divine, from ourselves, from others. The second is stirring. That's the place where we start to open up and read books and go to workshops and go to therapy and try to figure out what the next step is. And people probably stay in stirring for the most amount of time. But after that is surrender. And by surrender, I don't mean giving up. I mean giving in to our heart, giving in to what is being presented to us, giving in to what the divine wants for us. From that place, we can move into, and that's about surrendering the ego, hugely, right? So that's kind of the fulcrum. Then we can move into stillness. And in that space of stillness, I've come to know that when I have no other agendas and I'm completely in connection with the divine and the person I'm working with, everything I need is present. I don't have to know what's needed because it will flow in the grace of stillness. From that place, it prepares us for synergy. Synergy, inner synergy, like an inner orchestra, if you will. I like to reference my octopus teacher. Like, what greater creature has that kind of synergy in trillions of cells to operate as an orchestra, and everything that being needs is provided in the moment. And then we have external synergy, which I do not believe it is very evolutionary right now. There are not a lot of examples of collaborative synergy, meaning collaborative spiritual synergies. There are synergies in business. There's synergies in marketing and all of those kinds of things. But the reason I feel so grateful to be part of ATL and the Evolutionary Leaders Circle is because the evolutionary leaders are really in service to finding external synergies to evolve the planet. And so I'm seeing that hope there. Those are the 5 stages. The grace process formula is a simple formula, but it's complex to live. And so it starts with choice, and this came from my near-death experience, right? So we choose what we want to heal. Then we have to look at what judgments need to be released and what forgiveness is needed. That's how we heal the ego so that we can move into gratitude, love, joy, and wonder, which is the heart. And as you know, the Heart Math Institute we have 40 years of research now showing that the heart is not just a pump, but has its own brain. And I won't go into the whole thing, but the heart produces a master hormone that I believe sets us up to connect with our divinity.
I love you talking about the synergy piece. So, beautiful process. I want to go back to this synergy piece for just a moment. This idea of all inspired ideas have a life force, right? I used to, and I still do. I'll ask my divine guidance, like, hey, what do you want from me? And what guidance do you have for me and whatnot, right? But in the creation process now, one of the things I do, and I practice doing with my clients, is to tune into the wisdom of the thing itself, right? Even this podcast, it was an inspired idea. And so I would dialogue with the intelligence of the podcast. What do you want to do in the world? Why do you want to exist? Who do you want to have on you as guests, right? What's your purpose in the world? And that synergy piece of like, oh, there is a creative element always available that we are a part of and can connect to and participate with and partner with. Is that related to what you're talking about with synergy?
Yes. What came to my mind, and again, there's internal synergy and external synergy, is it's the work working us. So
Yes.
Project Light. So I would come back. It's a 9-hour time difference. I come back from Rwanda. It took me many, sometimes weeks, not because my heart was broken, but my heart was broken open. And there was such a, trauma healing isn't enough if you continue to live in poverty and you have a hopeless future. So I kept asking, 3 o'clock in the morning when I'm up with the jet lag, there's got to be something else. I know. It must be Barbara Marx Hubbard, who's a friend of mine. She knows what to do. Jean Houston, another mentor of mine, she knows what to do. Angeles Arian. I reached out to all of them. And I got appointments with all of them. but just before I did, I woke out of this, crazy haze, big booming voice, "You are the one you've been waiting for." And I was like,
damn it.
and then when I spoke to these amazing people, they all just said, because I started to download the Project Light formula, not the grace process, but this humanitarian aid that has not been replicated yet, but is very needed in the world. And they all said, "Yeah, no, you got this." And I was like, "What? I got this."
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
speaking of that, share, if you would, just a little bit about how you grew up and how your, like, I always look at how our wounds are a training program for our life's work, right? That is the higher purpose of the wound, is to inspire a particular trajectory of living that sends us on a path to feel and understand certain internal terrains, and externally that drives us to go develop skill and capacity that then gets used in purpose. Mm-hmm. So where'd you grow up?
Providence, Rhode Island.
Oh, yes.
Oh, in the area.
Yeah. Like, what was life like right before we started? You shared just a little bit about your dad, but like share a little bit about what life was like, and we'll talk about your dad as well.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's only with 2020 hindsight that we can put all these pieces together. But I have now come to truly cherish, and I knew early on that the traumas I experienced as a child were really part of my destiny and where I was going. Little did I know what the form would take. So I grew up in an Irish Catholic family with the Irish Catholic disease of alcoholism and codependency. I was the oldest of 5 children. My mom had some very serious mental health issues which were never addressed. When I was 12 years old, she gave birth to my youngest sister, came home from the hospital, and went into a 2-year depression. So I was responsible for my infant sister and the 3 other siblings, and my father was working 3 jobs to support the family. He was a policeman in Providence during the race riots in the 70s and during the mafia infiltration of the 50s and the 60s. He clearly was my hero, although was not available for us because he was busy healing the world, interestingly enough. But he showed me such a deep compassion for the people that he worked with. This is a guy who took down Raymond L.S. Patriarca, who was the New England crime boss, but they had a relationship. Like, in other words, they understood each other. When he would send somebody to prison, they would call him first when they got out. He'd get them a suit, he'd connect them with welfare, and he'd try to get them a job. That's how respected he was. Pretty phenomenal. And some of the things that I witnessed him do on television and on the news and in our home make me know now that he seeded my destiny. And so at the same time I was 12, I was being sexually molested by my parish priest. I share that there were, other abuses and whatnot. I do now see that set me on a journey of questioning religion and spirituality. And had I not gone on that journey, I would not now be a spiritual mentor. But you still have to honor these things that happened. It also helped me question institutions of every kind. Every other thing that happened, I really can now, because I love myself, I've healed that trauma, I've forgiven others for the sake of my own peace of mind and safety. And it is fun. And I would say that my mom and her mental illness also was a huge lesson, because I did not have mother love. And so
How did that set you up?
Well, I mean, and you know, because of her mental illness, there was a lot of trauma that she inflicted. However, as I got on the journey of healing with the divine feminine, I realized two things. I realized that I was, in some sense, in a better place to figure out what divine love was, because I knew what it wasn't, because I didn't have it. So I wasn't confused, as some people might be. I also began to realize, if we talk about on a soul level, if my mother's soul agreed to come in with me to be my mother, one of the things that happened for her was she was not able to receive love. So she sacrificed on a soul level. I'm not forgiving some of her behaviors, but when I started to have this love in my life and be loved and have so much love in my life, I realized what a sacrifice she made on a soul level to teach me what love wasn't and what it could be. And in a sense, such a great gift on that level. And later we were able to, well, she doesn't know we were able to heal, but we healed.
Yeah. I so appreciate that. You know, with one of my mentors, sometimes people will ask, how do you know when you've healed your wounds? And his response has always been, you would ask for them again. You know, when you've blessed them so thoroughly, you've seen the divine perfection of them so thoroughly, and its connection to your gift in the world and the gift to yourself, that you go, I would choose the path again. I would choose the same parents. I'd choose the same situation. Like, I would choose it. Now, that's pretty far down the rabbit hole of healing.
Thank you for saying that. I'm glad there was a caveat there.
Right? Like, that's like really far down. Like, you know, we don't start there at all and may never end up there. But that place where you see, like, what you were saying of blessing your mother, blessing the gift and sacrifice she made, and seeing its connection to what you are able to feel and do in the world. Again, I by no means do we start there. May not even ever end up there. But I wanted to just point it out, because sometimes there's this little opening of like, holy crap, I didn't see that there would ever maybe be a way for me to have forgiveness with especially with my primary wounders, whether it's mom, dad, a priest, a teacher, whomever. But to start to see, like, oh, it did inspire something in me. And I wouldn't be who I am without that inspiration. And that can be an opening. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, you're so welcome. If we have time, I'll tell you a story about a woman I worked with in Australia who is an Aboriginal person. And as we know, there was a deep genocide of Aboriginal people in Australia, one that continues today socially, economically, culturally. Been invited into these communities and worked with this particular woman in a group. Aboriginal Australians have the highest teenage suicide rate in the world. This woman's daughter had committed suicide. the woman herself was horribly abused as a child. We're talking about the Australian government kidnapped children from their Aboriginal parents and put them in institutions. This woman had experienced that as well. We had this group, we were together for a few days, and when we sat down to do her one-on-one piece, I remember her sitting there after sharing this amazing, also she had this, she was in constant pain and she walked with a cane. After we did our one-on-one session, and I'm just saying this, we're in the infinity circuit now, right? It's giver and receiver, but we meet in the sweet spot in the middle, and there's only love. And I just remember her at the end of this short period of time just saying, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I could rewrite my story. And I say this, there's a lot underneath that. But later, I saw her on Facebook. Also, she stopped walking with a cane. She stood up and stopped walking with the cane. About a month later, we saw a picture of her on Facebook, and I was like, I knew the name, but the person looked completely different to me. It was like she had a makeover, but she had a spiritual makeover. And this woman taught me, the vulnerability and the beauty and the preciousness of being fully present to someone whose pain is so deep. But if I could just be present without my ego and allow her the space to step into a self-loving place, whatever that looked like, I am transformed as much as she is.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. One question I always ask somebody sometime in one of these conversations, in one way, shape, or form, is about the news story. Mm-hmm. My guidance always tells me, Jeffrey, you're here to help leaders activate humanity's new story. That the old story we've been living as humanity is on its last leg, right? And that we create with the stories we tell. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, what would you say the new story of trauma or trauma healing is in the world?
Thank you for that. As you know, Barbara Marx Hubbard was a dear friend of mine. And for anyone who doesn't know Barbara, please Google her wheel of co-creation, her evolutionary wheel of co-creation, in which she talks about how the synergy between all aspects of our world, justice, legal system, education system, medical system, all of the things that are important to having a healthy world, how they can evolve. And I remember one night where I said, Barbara, there's something missing off this wheel. How could I say that to Barbara? And I said, healing trauma is the is why we are not evolving as a species and as a planet. We have this separation with our biospheres. We have separation with everything, all of the major important things in our lives, internally and externally. And I said, if we don't heal trauma, and just imagine, I don't know what out of 7 billion people, 2 billion, 3 billion are traumatized, if not more. If we don't heal trauma, we can't get enough people on the wheel of evolution because they are traumatized and physiologically not able, not in their hearts, their minds, or their bodies. So the new story is, and research is now backing up what I've been talking about for 20 years, that trauma is not an emotional event, but it creates a brain dysfunction. Until the brain dysfunction is healed, those stress hormones will continue to run our cells and our lives, and then we get broken down, and then illnesses and all these other things. We aren't able to be fully present to those we feel are enemies or who we feel are threatening to us. We're just all in our private, separate camps dealing with not feeling safe in our bodies. And in order for the new story to emerge, it is for people to take responsibility and commit to regulating their physiology, healing their trauma, and it's all possible. And we now have the technology, the healing technologies, to make that happen. We still need to catch up because right now mainstream psychotherapy is contraindicated for trauma. Because it doesn't address the somatic and physiological healing that needs to happen. And so once we claim that, humanity's story is going to be amazing.
So I am so appreciative of that, whether it's, Thomas Hübl or, the book that Oprah wrote with, what's his name? The book, What Happened to You? I think that's the name of it. The conversation of trauma at a collective level is coming online.
Yes.
You're a part of it, right? And I think the new story is trauma resolution is the doorway into humanity's new story.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Beautiful. Awesome.
You nailed it, Jeffrey.
I love you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the work you do in this world. If people want to learn more about you, if they want the five stages work, the grace process, they go to what, LoriLeyden.com?
Yes.
And that's spelled
Leyden.
Lori, Lori Leyden, LEYDEN.com. I know if you scroll down there, there is a place where you can sign up and get the grace process, the 5 stages process. You also have a nonprofit. Where do we go for that?
And that is createglobalhealing.org. And there you can watch my documentary that chronicles the connection between our Rwandan genocide survivors with the kids in Sandy Hook for healing. And it's all, free.
It's beautiful. It's an award-winning documentary. I highly recommend you go check it out. And that's at createglobalhealing.org. Last question. We'll end here. If there is one thing you know that you wish everybody knew, what would it be?
You are always safe, and connecting to the divine is just one breath away.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thanks for the work you do in the world. And thank you, everyone, for listening and taking the opportunity to examine your own trauma healing in service to humanity's evolution. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye. Hey there, thanks so much for listening in. If this conversation was powerful, if it stirred your soul or inspired your journey, then be sure to share it with a friend. Just copy and paste the link wherever you're listening to this podcast and text that link right now to a friend that you think would be inspired by this episode. And if this is your first time here, be sure to click that subscribe button over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and I'd really appreciate it if you'd leave a rating and review so I can get to know you and your thoughts better. To learn more about the work I do with emerging and established paradigm changers, go to thecourageousmessenger.com. That's all for today. Thanks so much for being here, and I hope to see you in the next episode.